Welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. My name is Tamar Williams and I'm a storyteller from Wales in the United Kingdom. And I'm really excited to be sharing stories with you on this incredible platform. But telling stories on a video is still really weird, so I'm gonna ease myself in with a little song. Ar lan y môr mae rosys cochion. Ar lan y môr mae lilies gwynion. Ar lan y môr mae nghariad yn cysgu'r nos a dyffro'n fwre. Amser maith yn ôl. A long time ago, there was a witch, a powerful witch, and her name was Ceridwen. Now Ceridwen had 2 children. She had a daughter whose name was Creirwy, and Creirwy was just as powerful as her mother. Where either of the 2 of them walked, the ground would shake below their feet, the leaves would tremble on the trees as if a wind had passed by. But Ceridwen also had a son, and her son's name was a Vagddu. And a Vagddu was not clever, was not magical, was not powerful. Where he walked, the world remained the same. No transformation, no change. He could do no magic at all. And Ceridwen, as time went past, became more and more frustrated with her son. She would look at him and she would think, Pam wyt ti mor sir? Pam wyt ti mor araf? Why are you so stupid? Why are you so slow? But as time went past, despite this railing from his mother, a Vagddu never got any more magical, never got any more powerful, until one day Ceridwen realised she would have to change him. She would have to meddle in the natural order of things. She would have to cast a spell on her son. Now she had a great cauldron, Crochan Awen, the cauldron of inspiration. And Ceridwen began to collect things to go into her cauldron to make a potion that would change her son from a stupid boy into a powerful magician. And she collected all the kind of things you could imagine a witch would put into her spell. But other things went into that cauldron too. Myth, story, chwedl, legend. They all went into the pot, and Ceridwen stirred the mixture around, and she looked at the shifting colours on the surface of the cauldron, and then her eyes grew dark and her chin grew sharp, and she swore, and all the birds took off from the trees as she realised that potion in the cauldron, it was not going to be ready for a year and a day, blwyddyn a diwrnod, and that somebody would have to stand there and stir it for a year and a day. Now Ceridwen did not want to do this herself. So out she went. And she went to the local village and she found a little boy whose name was Gwion Bach. Now Gwion Bach was very small and very scared indeed. He had these knobbly knees that showed through the holes in his trousers, and whenever Ceridwen came near, it was not just the leaves on the trees that quivered, Gwion Bach quivered too. He was terrified of her, but then everyone was terrified of her. And she took Gwion Bach by his ear. She dragged him away from the people who loved him. She stood him in front of that great cauldron, and she put the wooden spoon in his hand. She said, "Stir." And Gwion Bach stirred. And he stirred, and he stirred, and he stirred until his arm was sore, until the muscles of his back ached. But as he stirred, Ceridwen was watching him. And she said to him, "Paid ti am meddwl yn ei gysgu, dim un chwink, ti'n clywed fi? Don't you dare go to sleep, not even one little snooze, do you hear me? You need to keep an eye on that potion." Because you see, Ceridwen knew that when the potion was ready, it would turn a bright, shining gold, and 3 golden drops would come leaping up out of the potion. They would come turning and swirling down through the air, and she would have to be there to catch those golden drops and to put them into her son Evagddi's mouth, and he would become a magician. So Ceridwen said to Gwion Bach, "Don't you dare go to sleep. You keep your eyes open all the time, do you hear me? And if you see that potion turning to a bright shining gold, you shout, and I will come running, and I will catch those golden drops." So Gwion Bach, small, scared Gwion Bach with his shaking, knobbly knees, he stood there, stirring the potion, and he kept his eyes open the whole time. But oh, it was hard, and tiredness found its way to the very heart of him. His bones were tired, his blood was tired, every bit of him was tired. He felt his eyelids sinking, he felt his back beginning to hunch, and then just as he would start a great big yawn, "Wake up!" She'd be there every single time. He could not get away from her. And the year went past. The seasons turned. Gwanwyn, Haf, Hydref, Gaeaf, and Gwion Bach, still he stood, stirring that potion. Until one day he was so tired he could not take it anymore. One day he stood there stirring the potion, the great pot before him, and Gwion Bach felt all that exhaustion in him just take him over, and he fell asleep with his head on the wooden spoon. And in that moment, the potion began to change colour. It went bright yellow, and then a sort of deep orangey colour, and then it turned unmistakably bright, shining gold, and 3 drops appeared on the surface. They pushed their way up out of the skin of the surface of the potion, and then they jumped high in the air, and they came turning and swirling very slowly down through the air, and they landed on Gwion Bach's thumb. As he rested it on top of the wooden spoon, and Gwion Bach, he woke up because the potion was so hot, and and the potion went down his throat, into his belly, and when it reached his belly, something really strange happened to Gwion Bach. His fingers started to tingle, his toes started to tingle, his hair stood on end, and he felt all of his insides turning and swirling, and suddenly he was not a little boy anymore. Suddenly he was a powerful magician. He could turn himself into any animal that ran on the ground or flew in the sky or swam in the sea. But with this great knowledge of the land, of its power, of its magic, of his potential, came to the great and terrifying knowledge that he had drunk that potion instead of Ceridwen's son, and that she would certainly destroy him for it. And so Gwion Bach turned, and he did the only thing he could do. He ran away from that cauldron. He ran and he ran up into the mountains. As the ground got steeper and rougher around him, he ran up and up and up to the crest of the highest mountains in the north of Wales. But then, as he ran, as his feet pounded the earth and his heart pounded his chest, he knew suddenly with a terrible certainty that Cerridwen the witch was following him, and he knew too that she was faster than him. He knew that if he got caught by her, if she got her hands on him, she would not let go until he had been utterly destroyed. And so, in fear and horror, Gwion Bach, not knowing what to do, he realised that running was not going to help, and he stopped. And he remembered all the magic that he could do. And he started to change. He started to transform. Gwion Bach the boy grew a pair of long, brown, furry ears. Gwion Bach the boy became very small and squat close to the ground with long legs for running. Gwion Bach the boy became Gwion Bach Ysgyfarnog, hare, and in his hare form he ran over the mountains as fast as he could, as fast as his little hare legs would carry him. Ond roedd Cerridwen yn gwylio. Cerridwen the witch was watching. And she was even more powerful than him, and so she wasted no time at all in transforming herself. A long nose filled with sharp teeth, a long skinny body really good for running. She became Milgy, greyhound, and she pelted after the little hare. And the little hare that was Gwion Bach, he ran as fast as he could over the mountains, down into the valleys, up, down and all the way around, but wherever he turned, there she was. And Gwion Bach got an idea in his little hare brain, and he ran towards that silver ribbon of river, and just before he reached the river, he leapt up high in the air and he jumped, and he turned himself from hare into fish, and he went swimming down the river. But Cerridwen saw him do this, and she too went running towards the river. She too leapt up high in the air, and she transformed herself from greyhound to otter. And in her otter form, with its great sharp teeth and its long strong tail, she went swimming after the little fish that was Gwion Bach. And Gwion Bach, the little fish, he swam as hard and as fast as he could. Dyma fe nofio I lawr yr afon, a trio cuddio oddi wrth Cerridwen y wrach, ond pob tro sydd yn troi ei ben, dyna lle oedd hi, Cerridwen, dyfyrgu. And Gwion Bach knew he would be swimming for the rest of his life. He knew that she was faster than him, and he got a thought in his little fishy brain, and he looked above him and he saw the light reflected on the surface of the river, and he went swimming up towards the light, lan, 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 and he jumped out of the river. A dyma fe'n traws newid ei hun, troi ei hun, traws newid ei hun I fewn I Aderyn bach. He became a little bird and he flapped up out of the river. Ond mi oedd Cerridwen yn wrach bwerus, a gwelodd hi hwn. A dyma hi hefyd yn nofio tuag at yr arwyneb, a dyma hi hefyd yn neidio allan o'r dŵr a thraws newid ei hun I fewn I aderyn lot mwy. She became a much bigger bird, eagle, with huge wide wings and a great curved beak and talons just the right size to grip and kill a little fluffy bird. And Gwion Bach, in his little bird shape, he flapped as hard as he could, up, 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 over the mountains, over the clouds, towards the stars even he tried to go. But he knew it was no good. He knew Cerridwen was faster than him. He knew that if she caught him, she was going to do something terrible to him. And Gwion Bach, he saw down below him the green fields of the world spread out. And he came flying down in a great big arc, down towards the ground, and there he saw below him a farmhouse. And next to the farmhouse he saw a farmyard, and in the farmyard Gwion Bach, with his sharp bird eyes, saw a great big pile of grain. And Gwion got an idea in his head, and he came flying down to the ground, and just before he hit the ground, he transformed himself once more into a tiny piece of grain. darn bach, 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 or wennydd. But Ceridwen saw him do this, and she too came plummeting down towards the ground. Just before she hit the ground, she turned herself into something small and fat and feathery. Hen. And in that hen shape, she began to eat up all the grain in the farmyard. She munched, she crunched, she gulped, she swallowed. She swallowed, she gulped, she munched, she crunched, she gulped, she munched and she swallowed. She ate and she ate and she ate until she was round and fat and ready to burst. She ate until she had eaten every single piece of grain in that farmyard, including the piece of grain that was Gwion Bach. She swallowed him whole. And when she was done, Ceridwen was so pleased with herself, she turned herself back into a woman. And she was so happy that she had destroyed him, she started to laugh. She laughed and she laughed and she laughed, and as she laughed, she found herself putting her hands on her belly. As she realised in horror, Gwion Bach, the boy, Gwion Bach, the hare, Gwion Bach, the little bird, Gwion Bach, the tiny piece of grain, was now Gwion Bach, the baby, that he had transformed alongside her and was still alive inside her. Well, she was so furious that she swore that when that baby was born, she would kill it. But when the baby was born, Ceridwen held him in her arms, and she loved him right away. And so, to keep him safe, she tied him up in a little bag, and she blew once, and the bag with the baby in it sailed out on the sea. And the bag with the baby in it sailed on the sea for thousands of years as the world changed. And then one day the bag came back to shore, and someone found the bag, and someone found the baby, and gave the baby a new name for the golden light shining on his brow and the stories and the songs in his heart. Taliesin. But that is a story for another day. Ar lan y môr mae roses cochion. Ar lan y môr mae lilies gwynion. Ar lan y môr mae nghariad yn cysgu'r nos a deffro'n fwre. Thank you for listening to that first story. That story comes from Wales, and it's one of the most famous stories that we have in Wales. It's also known as the birth of Taliesin, and Taliesin, the baby in the story, grows up to become one of the most famous bards in the whole of Wales, one of the most famous poets in the whole of Wales. And we are going to return to poets and bards a bit later on in this set. But I want to go to Cornwall for the next story. So I grew up in Wales, but my mother comes from Cornwall, which is why I have the name Tamar, which is the name of a river in Cornwall. And this story starts in a small village. And this village was terrorised by a giant. Boom, 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 boom. Oh yes, he was indeed a terrifying creature. The giant Bolster was his name. And Bolster was so huge and horrifying that if you heard him coming, boom, 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 all you could do was run. Scarpa, go! Because if Bolster reached down with one of his great big hairy hands and picked stew up, you'd end up being chomped by his huge teeth. They were about the same size as trees, each and every one of them. And so the people of the countryside, terrorised by this great giant, they did the only thing they could do, which was to lock themselves away, to go into their houses, shut their doors, bar their windows, keep their children inside. And some of us, many of us, know what that's like because we're doing it right now. The people of this small village, all they could do was stay inside and cower and hope that soon the monster would move on. And in this village lived a girl. This girl's name was Agnes. And Agnes, like everyone else, she had shut her door, she had closed her windows tight, and she listened at the keyhole sometimes, and she could hear the sound of boom, 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 as Bolster went cannoning around the village, looking for any soul that happened to be out and about, picking up sheep and cows and tossing them into his mouth. And Agnes was doing as she had been told. She was staying safe, she was staying home, but she couldn't help but feel a great longing to go out. Her little village was not far from the sea. It was just a few miles' walk from the edge of the cliff. And she had always spent, whatever day it was, whether it was sunny, rainy, snowy, every day she would go at least once to look at the sea, to breathe in the salt of the ocean, and she could not do that now. And it was one day when she had been inside for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it was getting really hard. Agnes opened up her shutter across her window, just a little crack. And she stuck her nose to the opening and she breathed in, and she breathed in through that little tiny crack came a little breeze, and the breeze took with it a tiny little tang of the salt, salt sea, and it went into Agnes's nostril, and she and her heart ached for it. She longed to go to the ocean again, and with that Agnes decided enough was enough. She'd been cowering inside for too long. The people had been cowering inside for too long. Something had to be done about the giant Bolster. And if no one else was going to do it, it was going to be her. And so, without further ado, Agnes opened up her front door for the first time in weeks. And she stepped out into the deserted village for the first time in weeks, and it was very odd. Some of us might be having this experience now when you're walking about and everything's dead quiet, and where there used to be life, there's nothing because people are cowering inside. And Agnes, as she walked through the village, it seemed very odd because the houses were watching her, but she could not see anyone's faces at the window. And she took the road that led out of the village towards the cliffs, towards the sea, for she had an idea where Bolster the giant might be. Every day after he'd finished stuffing his great stomach, he went and sat on the cliff tops and dangled his feet into the sea. And so she went looking for him there. And she followed the road until the road became a path, and then the path led up, up, up to the crown of the cliff tops, and there above the cliff tops she saw it glimmering. The ocean, the sea, and her heart gave a great leap despite what she was about to do. And then Agnes turned and she saw there, just beyond the cliff, just as it turned round the headland, Bolster the giant. He looked like a rock, a great leathery grey rock. He sat there huge and horrible, his feet dangling over the edge into the sea, and Agnes swallowed hard. for she did not know what she was going to do next, but she was going to have to improvise. And she walked, strong and brave, shoulders squared up towards the giant bolster, and when she was within his shadow, for he was huge and blocking out the sun, Agnes took a deep breath and she said, "Oi!" And Bolster, who'd been picking his teeth with a bone, he went, "Huh?" And he looked down at the tiny person in front of him. And he was a bit taken aback, because Breakfast didn't normally walk right up to him and say, "Oi." And Bolster the giant, he peered at this tiny girl. "What do you want?" "I've come," said Agnes, "to tell you to cease and desist and move. Leave. Go." Well, Bolster saw this. He heard this in her little squeaky voice, and he could not help himself. He threw back his great big head and he... And Agnes did not know what to do. But she was improvising. And so she put her hands on her hips, and she did exactly the same thing. She... And Bolster, "Huh? Who was this? Laughing at him? No one ever laughed at the great Bolster. This was new." And he got really close to her, and he peered at her, and something happened then, because you see, Bolster had never properly looked at anyone else before. And he looked at this tiny girl as she was to him, and he looked at her lovely hair and her lovely hands and her lovely feet, and Bolster's heart gave a big thump, and Bolster the giant went, "I love you." Now Agnes, she had not been expecting this. She took a step back, and then she thought to herself, "No, Agnes girl, come on, improvise." And so she said, "Prove it. Prove that you love me." "Oh," said Bolster, because he did not know how to do that. I know. I'll take this great big rock here, and I will throw it into the ocean as far as you can see, and I will make a whole new island just for you. That's how much I love you." "It's not very romantic, is it?" said Agnes. I know. I'll find a river and I'll divert it past your house, and you will always have fresh water. That's romance, isn't it?" And Agnes, she shook her head. "You've got to do better than that," she said to Bolster. And Bolster really was by now panicking, his great big gianty heart filled with love for this tiny girl. How could he prove it to her? And Agnes watched as he got more and more worried and more panicked and desperate, until finally she said, I know how you can prove your love to me." "How?" said Bolster. "I'll do anything for you, my darling." "Do you see that great big crack in the cliff top behind you? I want you to fill that great big hole up all the way to the brim with your blood, and then I'll know that you truly love me." And Bolster thought, what a good idea. She's a genius. And he went to the hole, and he extended his great big arm over the hole, and then he took out his penknife and he cut. And the blood started to pour down his arm into the hole, Great big droplets of blood the size of houses they were. They came bowling down his arm and splashing into the hole, and Bolster stood there proudly filling up the hole with his blood. And Agnes watched, and Bolster stood there as the blood trickled down his arm, splashing into the hole, as the hole did not fill up. Bolster stood there, bleeding into the hole. He stood there for hours and hours and hours, until his head was spinning, until his legs felt a little weak. But that great big crack in the cliff top did not fill up. Bolster stood there, bleeding into the hole, for 3 days and 3 nights, his heart pounding with love for Agnes, but that hole did not fill up. Because what Agnes knew that Bolster did not was that the hole, the crack in the cliff, extended all the way down through the cliff and out the other side. And Bolster's blood was at that very moment washing out to sea with the tide and mingling with the tears of the fishes. Bolster stood there, bleeding into the hole, until, at one moment, he took a great sigh and he keeled over, stone dead, bled dry. And Agnes did feel just the tiniest pull of regret and sorrow at the sight of the huge giant there, dead for love of her. But he had, after all, been the most terrible monster of them all. And so she turned, and she went back to her village, and she told the people what she had done. And when they heard, they were so grateful that they renamed their village after her. And so to this day that village is called St. Agnes. And it's true. If you go just a little way away from the village towards the cliffs, you will see that the cliffs are still stained pink and red with the blood of Bolster the giant. Thank you for listening. So I've got one more story for you, and I'm just going to grab my ukulele for this one. And this is a story that I first heard told by Taffy Thomas, who I think was telling for the World Storytelling Cafe a couple of weeks ago. And it's a story about a man called Taffy as well. And this is one of my very favourite stories. Because Taffy Morgan loved to sing. And of course, if you know anything about Wales, you'll know that we all love to sing in Wales, and we are all very fine singers indeed. Except for Taffy Morgan. Taffy Morgan was not a fine singer. In fact, when Taffy Morgan opened his mouth to sing, all the birds would take off from the trees and fly away. And anybody who lived nearby, they'd go into their houses and they'd shut their doors and their windows, and they would stick their fingers in their ears and they would wait for him to stop. And it really was very trying for the local people who lived nearby to Taffy, because he liked to sing whatever time of day it was. Did not matter, he would open his mouth and off he would go. Now one day Taffy Morgan was singing in his garden, because it was a bright day of summer. It's been beautiful here, by the way, for weeks and weeks and weeks during lockdown. And it was one of those fine warm days, not too hot, but not too breezy. And Taffy Morgan was outside. He was enjoying the sun, and with the sun had come a song bubbling up inside him, ready to flow out and please the world. And Taffy opened his mouth and he started to sing Calon Lan. Nid wy'n gofyn bywyd moethus, a'r y byd na'i berlau man. Gofyn wyf am galon hapus, calon onest, calon lan. Calon lan yn llawn ddaioni, tec a chiwn ar lili dlos. Dim ond calon lan all gan i, canu'r dydd a chanu'r nos. But when Taffy sang it didn't sound quite like that, even if I do say so myself. Because when Taffy sang it, all the birds immediately took off from the trees and flew away. And the dogs in the local farmyards, they lay down and they put their paws over their ears and they started to quake. And the cows and the sheep in the fields, they went and tried to find a hole to put their heads into. And all the people around, oh no, not again, went into their houses, slammed their doors, shut their windows and stuck their fingers in their ears. And Taffy sang on, enjoying himself. But at that moment, walking past Taffy's garden was an old man, an old bard, an old poet. This bard, he was the finest storyteller, the finest poet, the finest singer in the whole of the land. But he was also a very grumpy old man. And when he heard Taffy trying to sing Calon Lan, it really grew. He did not know what was going on, who could make such a terrible sound. And then he saw the culprit. And his great bushy grey eyebrows, they sank down in his face. And his chin got very sharp and angry. And he strode up to the garden fence and he looked Taffy in the eyes and he said, Beth ar y ddaear, wyt ti'n meddwl ti'n neud? Ti'n swnio fel dy bod ti'n lladd cath. What in the world are you doing? You sound like you're killing a cat. And then, whoop, the old bard turned on his heel and strode off down the road. And Taffy felt really quite morose. Because you see, his neighbours always shut their doors and their windows, but they were polite about it. Nobody'd ever actually been honest with him about his singing before. This was the very first time. And Taffy went back into his house and he sat down in his kitchen and he felt his heart sinking. And at that moment, as he sat there, he heard a knock at his front door. And Taffy went to open his front door, and there, standing outside his front door, were 3 of the Tylwyth Teg. Now the Tylwyth Teg, for those of you who don't know, are the fairy folk of Wales. And they're not like fairies with fluttery wings who cast spells with magic wands. They are more powerful and more tricksy than that. They can give gifts and great wishes, but they can also cast terrible spells. And so it does to be polite to the Tylwyth Teg if you see them and give them what they want and send them on their way, and no harm will come to you. And so Taffy was a little careful as he addressed the 3 of the Tylwyth Teg that stood on his doorstep. But the Tylwyth Teg, they were not interested in playing tricks at that moment. They looked up at Taffy and they said, "Ma chwant bwyd arnom ni. We're hungry. Can we come in to your house?" And Taffy knew that if the Tylwyth Teg ask a favour of you, then you should give it to them, and so he welcomed them in. And that night, Taffy Morgan and the Tylwyth Teg, they had a fine old party, a great time. They sang songs. Tylwyth Teg didn't seem to mind that Taffy was a terrible singer. They told stories, they shared poetry, and they ate and they ate and they ate and they drank and they drank and they drank, and it was the finest party that you can imagine. The kind of party that I think lots of us are longing for right now. And when the sun came up, the Tylwyth Teg turned to Taffy and they looked at him and they said, "You've been kind to us, so we will be kind to you. Ask us for anything, we will grant you one wish." Well, Taffy did not have to think for long. He looked at the Tylwyth Teg and he said, "I wish that I could have a musical instrument, that no matter how badly I play it, it always makes the most beautiful music in the world." Well, there was a flash of light, and the Tylwyth Teg disappeared, and in their place was a beautiful golden harp, Telyn Aur. Well, from that day onwards, Taffy Morgan and his golden harp were very famous indeed. He travelled up and down the length and breadth of Wales. He played in all the parties, all the Eisteddfodau, all the weddings. And wherever he went, people would say, "There goes Taffy Morgan, the famous harpist. Just wait until he gets his harp out and plays a tune. You have never heard such music in your life. You will not be able to stop yourself from dancing." And this went on for some time, until one day Taffy was invited to play his harp in his local village festival. Well, he got up on the stage and he put his harp on his lap and he put his fingers on the strings and he looked out into the crowd, and he was about to start to play when he saw, standing in the crowd, a familiar face, an old man with thick, grey, bushy eyebrows. The old bard who'd been so rude to him just a few weeks before. And Taffy got a thought in his head. Payback. I'm going to teach him a lesson. And then Taffy Morgan started to play. And of course, the music flowed into the legs and the arms and the fingers and the toes of all the people standing there, and they all began to dance. And of course, the old bard, he began to dance too. But Taffy did not stop playing. He was watching the old bard. He played on and on and on, and the old man was dancing faster and faster and faster, and the sweat was pouring down his brow, and people were starting to say, "Stop, Taffy, give us a break, stop." But Taffy played on and on and on and on, ymlaen ac ymlaen ac ymlaen ac ymlaen, on and on and on and on. And he was watching the old bard as the old man got more and more tired, until finally Taffy Morgan, after a whole hour of playing, took his fingers off the strings, got up and took a bow. And everybody in the audience collapsed. They were all so exhausted. And Taffy put down his harp and he looked about him, and he was well pleased with himself. But when he looked back to pick up his golden harp, the harp had vanished. Because as easily as they can give you gifts, the Tylwyth Teg can take them away again if they don't think you've used them in the right way. And Taffy Morgan never saw his golden harp again, but he did continue to sing. So if you ever come to Wales, and if you ever hear a noise that makes all the birds take off from the trees and everybody goes into their houses and shuts their doors and their windows, you will know who it is. Taffy Morgan. Thank you so much for joining me for these stories. Thank you for listening, and please do keep checking out what the World Storytelling Cafe is offering. So many wonderful storytellers and such a wonderful platform. Thank you again for joining me. My name's Tamar Williams, and for listening to these stories from Wales and from Cornwall.
Young and old, you've been listening to a wonderful storyteller. And if you really liked it, if you've got a little money, doesn't have to be a lot, a little goes a long, long way, as they say. And you can afford it. Just pop it into the storyteller's hat, because right now they're not earning at all, so whatever you've got, it will be appreciated. And I'm sure you parents will have set a good example for your children. Oh, it's lovely. I'm only joking. it will keep some of us going through this crisis. And those of you that are all self-employed out there will know exactly what I mean, and you're probably exempt.